Hi, I'm Lily Hope. My Tlingit name is Wushkindaindaat. Wushkindaindaat yuchat duasak, yes nachatsati, duckdain tan ayachat. Deyachit dach ayachat, kashayihit, ka takhit, dleitka yadi ayachatsu. My Tlingit name is Wushkindaindaat. I am Raven Duckdain Tan from the Snail House and Man's Head House out of Hoonah, Alaska, following the matrilineal line of my mother's people. And I've been telling stories for, I guess, since 2004, and I share them internationally and with the school district and with wide audiences. I'm happy to be here today, and thank you to KTOO for having me, for including me, Trickster Company, for inviting me over. And I'm going to share a story today from my grandmother. She's been telling this story to me since I was a child. Some people call it the Salmon Boy. You'll hear versions of it possibly in print. Other storytellers tell this story, and we have named it A Haaw. Here we go. Not so long ago, in a village not so far from here, there lived a little boy. And this little boy lived in this fishing village with his mother and father. He was probably about this tall. And this little boy, he loved to go fishing. He would take his fishing pole down to the water's edge right near the village, and he'd cast off, and he'd reel in real slow. And that boy was happy fishing there all day long. Sometimes, his pole would bend. It took his bait. He didn't catch that one. He was happy there all day long, and whatever he'd catch, and whatever his parents would catch, they'd go up the shore, and they'd be cutting off the heads and cleaning out the guts of their salmon, and they'd be cutting it into strips to take it back to the smokehouse to store their salmon up for the winter. And that little boy, he'd be fishing down there, and every now and then his mother would come down to where he was fishing, and she'd stand next to him, and she'd tell them the ways of the Tlingit people. And she'd say, "You see those beautiful salmon jumping out there in the water, little one? You see those fish jumping? There's something we say to those fish. We say, 'Hey, how?' We say, 'Hey, how?' And those fish are jumping and jumping." And that little boy, he looks at his mother and he says, "Hey, how? Hey, how?" And he looks and a fish jumps and he goes, "Hey, how?" He says, "Hey, how?" And those fish are jumping and jumping out there. Well, that mama goes back to her work, and that boy stands there on the beach, and every time he sees a fish, he says, "Hey, how? Hey, how?" And the mother smiles to herself, watching her boy learn the ways of the Tlingit people. "Hey, how?" A little while later in the day, the mother comes back, and she says, "There's something else I want to tell you, very important about the Tlingit people. No matter what you do in your life, no matter where you go, you always respect the animals in the ocean. Always respect the animals on land. No matter what you do, you respect them." And that little boy, he's like, "I don't have to respect anything. Respect." And he reels in real quick, throws his pole over his shoulder, and walks down the beach far away from his parents. He's like, "Respect." And he casts off way down the way. And he's fishing there for a while, and the mother, she goes back to her work. She's shaking her head. She's trying to tell him the ways of the Tlingit people. And he's fishing out there, and he's got something, and it's not letting go. And he's reeling it in and pulling. Oh gosh. It's a tiny one, and he's all slimy. Oh my gosh, he's like greenish black. He's almost dripping that slime off. He's like, "Oh man, you're so slimy, and your eyes, they're like sticking out on the sides going, and he goes, and your lips, they're like," he goes, "Oh, that's so ugly." And he unhooks that fish, and he grabs it by the tail, and he swings it over his head. He goes, "You're so ugly, you're double ugly." And he throws it in and goes, "Ha ha, double ugly, double ugly." He's laughing down there on the beach. You know how mamas are. She's way up the beach. She's watching and listening to him laugh at that fish. What did she just tell him about respecting the animals in the ocean? And that boy, he's laughing. Well, the day goes on, and the day starts to wear on, and the sun begins to go down, and mother and father, they're putting away their things, and the mama calls out. She says, "All right, little one, time to go. Let's go. Time to go home." And she looks down the beach, and he's not standing where he was earlier in the day. And she nudges the daddy, and she says, "Daddy, did he say he was going somewhere else? Where did he go?" And they look down the beach this way, and there's no trace of him. And The dad's like, I don't know. And she's like, well, let's go. And they go back to the village. That's all they can do. They go back to the village and they tell all the villagers, they say, tomorrow morning, we got to go out. We got to look for our boy. He disappeared. And the next morning, cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, they all go out to the shoreline and they walk down the beach all the way to the cliffs. And there's no trace of their boy. And they go all the way down the shoreline this way, all the way around the point. No trace of that boy there either. They go into the woods looking for him. Maybe he went back into the woods where the kids play in the tree houses. No trace of that boy, not a shoe, not a fishing pole. He's just gone. And that mama's thinking about how he was making fun of that fish. And she's shaking her head and her heart is so sore. And the seasons change. Fishing season ends and the snows come and the winter comes and then it's springtime again and the skunk cabbage begins to push up through the moss and their boy still hasn't returned. And then it's fishing season again and the mother and father, they bring their boat out to the shore and they bring their boat into the water and drop their nets. And they're sitting out there in the water and the mama, she looks out on the water and those fish are jumping. And she thinks of her boy from last year and she says, "Hey, Haaw," she says. "Hey, Haaw." And those fish are jumping and jumping. "Hey, Haaw," she says. "Hey, Haaw." Meanwhile, that little boy is out there in the water, jumping around. And he says, "What is this?" I say, "Hey, Haaw," to the fish. And every time he hears, "Hey, Haaw," he jumps and jumps again. Pretty soon, the mother and father pull their nets back into the boat, and these beautiful fish are caught, and their gills are caught in the net, and they pull it all in, and they bring their boat up onto shore. They bring their fish onto their working tables, and they start cutting off the heads, and cleaning out the guts, and cutting their salmon into strips to go back to the smokehouse. And that mother's thinking about her boy. "Hey, Haaw." And she's got this fish, and she's pushing down, and she can't get her knife through the neck of this fish. And she's, and she looks down on the blade, and she looks at the neck of the fish. There's twisted copper around the blade of her knife. And she nudges her husband. She goes, look at this. And around the neck of that salmon is a twisted copper necklace, just like the necklace their boy was wearing last year when he disappeared. And she says, do you think maybe? And she dared not say, or maybe. And they take that fish and they leave their things where they are and they go back to the village and they bring that beautiful salmon and they place it in a finely woven cedar basket lined with fresh grass. And they take that fish and they put it in there and then they put it up in the eaves of the house and they go to bed. And everyone is quiet. They fall asleep. And before they hear raven call, they hear and they go and they run and they look, and there in the basket is her boy, returned to his human form. She brings that basket down and looks. Look, his fingers are all there, his toes. And she grabs him up and she turns him around, so happy to see her boy return to her. And she grabs one of his hands and the daddy grabs his other hand, and the three of them walk out of the village and they walk down to the water and they see those beautiful fish jumping in the water and they say, "Hey, Haaw," they say, "Hey, Haaw." And those fish are jumping and jumping. And they say that boy, he went on to be a leader for his people. And he taught his people all the ways of the salmon people in the ocean. And he was able to lead them in how we treat our animals on the land and on the sea. We always respect them. Thank you.